origins of the Ku Klux Klan by Jason Blanks. Today I'd like to present to you the origins of the Ku Klux Klan. The Ku Klux Klan is sometimes better referred to as the KKK. Some people don't realize it, but there were actually three different clans or phases in the KKK's history over the years. The phases of clans are consisted of the first clan, which went on from its origins in 1866 when it was initially founded till 1871. The second was from 1915 to 1944, and the last and present went on from the 1950s until present day. The root word to the organization's name, Ku Klux, actually means circle in Greek. The Klan started as a fraternal club that was founded by 6 ex-Confederate soldiers that had just gotten back home from the Civil War in Pulaski, Tennessee in 1866. These soldiers were not too happy to find their beloved homes in ruins and their slaves trying to become more independent. The club gained popularity among white Protestant men that were mostly Confederate veterans. They didn't take kindly to the newly freedmen and their new way of life. The Klan consisted of people from all walks of life, some of which were even politicians. They started to ride horseback by night and noticed that it would frighten the superstitious blacks when they rode by them. They started to wear masks and costumes in order to intimidate the blacks even further and also to conceal their identity. During these times, they used what they had as a guise, sometimes using burlap sacks as masks. These rides eventually led to violence and became a vehicle for Southern white underground resistance to radical Reconstruction. Klansmen punished blacks for a variety of reasons, which included behaving in an impudent manner toward whites. They whipped the teachers of newly freedmen and most of the time set fire to the schoolhouses. Their main concern was to do away with the Republican influence of the North by terrorizing and murdering party leaders, and to anyone who supported the Republican Party. They thought that the North's imposing role over the South's beliefs infringed on their livelihood. They fed off the growing resentment towards a Republican-ran government that was now, in their eyes, imposing their rule upon them. In 1866, there was a riot in Memphis, Tennessee, involving some Klan members and an ex-federal troops that were black. This riot resulted in 47 deaths, 70 being injured. Just 2 months later, there was another riot in New Orleans that resulted in 37 blacks being killed and 3 whites. The 3 whites were attempting to advocate for the blacks. By 1867, the Klan had found its purpose. In December the same year, the term Invisible Empire was used to describe the Klan's southern territory. Nathan Bedford Forrest, an ex-Confederate general, would become the first Grand Wizard of the KKK. He would be instrumental in changing the Klan to becoming more militaristic. The Klan had a hierarchy system, which included at the top the Grand Wizard, which led the entire empire of the South, and underneath him, the hierarchy system was the Grand Dragons, which led the realms, which were land masses inside of the empire. Other positions of leadership were Grand Titans and the Cyclops. With the upcoming election nearing of 1868, the violence and brutality began to grow. The election was crucial to both sides. Republicans needed the victory to prevent the Southern whites from gaining control of their own states. The Klan knew that, if given a chance, blacks would vote for the presidential candidate Ulysses S. Grant. In Kansas alone, there were 2,000 murders committed toward blacks. There was a high death toll in other states, like Georgia and Louisiana also. In the same year, Nathan Bedford Forrest disbanded the KKK, disgusted with its violence. Many would follow him after that. The Klan reached a membership count of several 100,000 at its peak during the Reconstruction era. Grant did win the election of 1868, and his slogan was, "Let us have peace." Republicans also won a majority in Congress. In Georgia, Louisiana, and Kansas, the most violent states, Democrats won decisive victory at the polls. All the violence in the South showed that North of the South had not learned its lesson. The Klan's plan had backfired. Stricter laws were soon to be in place that would make it difficult for the Klan to act as they had. Local factions remained active for a while, but bills were passed putting a damper on things like the Force Act of 1870 and the Ku Klux Klan Act in 1871. Both these bills, authorized by President Grant, were to suppress the Klan by force and impose heavy penalties upon them. The Enforcement Acts were passed in 1871, which made it illegal to interfere with the voter registration, voting, office holding, or jury service of blacks. They also enacted laws that would make night riding illegal and took down conspirators by force. In the same year, President Grant relocated some troops from the Indian Wars to southern South Carolina to stop the Klan violence. Grant did not rigorously enforce these laws, although he did make hundreds of arrests of Klan members. Convictions were hard to obtain due to the local sheriffs either supporting the Klan's cause or they were fearful. When the Depression of 1873 hit, the North's emphasis went toward its financial struggles rather than the South's racial problems. Political influence started to sway back in the Democratic favor. This period in time in the South would give rise to the Black Codes, which were laws made up to oppress blacks. In 1882, the federal government declared the organization unconstitutional. The Klan's second phase was founded in 1915 when the preacher and promoter Colonel William J. Simmons conducted a speech on Stone Mountain. He was inspired by Thomas Dixon's novel, The Klansman, that was released in 1905, and the D.W. Griffith film, The Birth of a Nation, which was released in 1915. The Birth of a Nation actually premiered at the White House during President Woodrow Wilson's term. The film depicts the KKK rescuing white women from black men that are portrayed as lustful savages. The new revived Ku Klux Klan was now fueled by patriotism, Americanism, nativism, and a romantic nostalgia of the Old South. This Klan not only opposed blacks, but also Jews, Catholics, immigrants, socialists, and workers' unions. They preached 100% Americanism. This Klan was not bound to the confines of the South, but also was popular in the West and in the North. At its peak, they saw a number close to 3 to 4 million members. By 1921, while the Immigration Act was placed, they had a full-time paid recruiter. They claim to have had 15% of America's population. During this time, other traditions came to be, like the infamous white robes, which the Klan is so famous for wearing, and the burning of crosses became a way to incite fear. In 1924, 40,000 Klansmen marched on Pennsylvania Avenue in front of the White House in Washington, D.C., sending a message to the government that there should be a white Protestant United States. The Second Klan expressed a defensive reaction to white Protestants in small-town America, who felt threatened by the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia and by the large-scale immigration of the previous decades that had changed the character of American society. During this time, the Klan was responsible for more than 500 murders. They enjoyed the last growth spurt in 1928 when Alfred E. Smith received the Democratic presidential nomination. During the Great Depression in the 30s, the Klan's numbers considerably declined. By 1930, they only had 30,000 members. During the 40s, some states made up laws preventing the donning of masks. There were a number of reasons for the demise of the Second Klan. Internal divisions, external opposition, and criminal behavior by the leaders were just some of the reasons. The Second Klan was then dissolved totally when the government pursued the organization for tax collection purposes. The Third Klan, which is the last and present-day Klan, came to be in the 50s and was fueled by the Civil Rights Movement in the South. KKK members were responsible for some heinous crimes. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 was met with resistance by the Klan, which resulted in numerous instances of bombings, whippings, and shootings. In 1963, the KKK was responsible for the death of 4 black girls in the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing in Birmingham, Alabama. President Lyndon B. Johnson denounced the organization in a nationwide television address, announcing the arrest of 4 Klansmen in the connection to the killing of a white Alabama civil rights worker. After the 60s, the resurgence dwindled and the KKK membership again declined. They were unable to stem the growth of a new radical tolerance in the years that would follow. Today, there is some activity, but mostly just nonviolent protest. The membership today stands at around a few thousand with about 150 chapters. Cases of violence have become more isolated. The Klan now has become fragmented and is made up of several competing, and some have entered alliances with the neo-Nazis and other extremist groups. I hope you have enjoyed this documentary about the Ku Klux Klan and its origins. Thank you for watching.